Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Good morning and welcome to another segment of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peer and I'll be your host this morning. Our guest today on Capitol Preview is Representative Rob Taylor, Republican from West Des Moines. Rob, good to see you and thanks for coming in.
Glad to be here, Bill.
Thanks. I'm going to ask you, just because we're getting to that point in the session, I just want to know what you think of this year's legislative session and kind of give me a summation of
well,
it
started out very fast and it's come to a snail's pace at this point in time. So, you know, we got a lot of things done early in session. It looked to be a promising and short session. One of the things that came up, of course, was the gas tax, and we, of course, brought that through both chambers very quickly. The governor signed it and we were off and running. But from there, we still don't have our budget targets yet, and things are at a snail's pace right now.
Yeah.
So
I know it's probably frustrating to you because I know you like to get things done. I know that's your personality.
Well,
so.
I do, and you know, I have a philosophy that idle minds are dangerous minds, and sometimes when legislators don't have a lot to do up there waiting for things as fundamental as budget targets, sometimes we think a little too much.
Yeah.
So
yeah, very good. Let's talk a little bit about the Supplemental State Aid. Why don't you kind of jump in there and kind of go through that a little bit?
Well, previously we knew it as allowable growth. Now we call it Supplemental State Aid. And under Iowa law, we were supposed to have that done and passed within the first 30 days of session. Actually, out of the Iowa House of Representatives, our very first bill that we ran out of the House this year was a bill for Supplemental State Aid, in which the House Republicans recommended a 1.25% increase in Supplemental State Aid. At the time, the Senate Democrats were countering with a 6% supplemental state aid. I have a unique perspective, I think, at the Iowa House, because of all the committees that I sat on on ethics as their chair, I sat on appropriations, I sat on economic growth, human resources, which is health and human services, and then I also sat on education appropriations. And with our budget being as tight as it is this year, it's been a real struggle in trying to make sure that we have the proper amount of funding to fund the services that we've already promised, yet still put together a 2-year budget. So we felt very comfortable at 1.25% supplemental state aid. It was still a growth. It wasn't a cut. The Senate Democrats think that it's not enough, and here we stand. That at the end of the day, supplemental state aid is really the wrench that's in the machine right now that's keeping us from moving ahead with everything else. But because of that unique perspective, I see more of the budget than most of my colleagues do. And what really surprised me this year was when you look at our $7.1 billion budget in the state of Iowa, 90% of our budget is taken up by 3 items: state wages and benefits, health and human services, and education. So whatever we do in education directly impacts now health and human services as well as state wages and benefits. So we're having to move in the direction of making some very hard choices, making sure that we fully fund education like we have promised in the past, but yet make sure that we're fully funding our health and human services to those people in our communities that need health and human services the most.
Well, Rob, in your opinion, what do you think it's going to take to get the two sides together on this? Well,
I'm hopeful that as the weather gets nicer outside, and people want to be, you know, many of my colleagues are farmers, and they're looking out the window and saying, you know, it's time to plant. I hope that good weather is the precipitous, if you will, for us to get our budgets done, get that supplemental state aid done. That's in conference committee right now, so it's in leadership's hands. And I know that they had some thoughtful dialogue last week. We're hoping for some more thoughtful dialogue this week, and I would sure like to see by the end of this week, hopefully no later than the end of next week, that we can come to a consensus on what this year's supplemental state aid should be.
Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
I know it's been very frustrating to you.
Thank you.
One of the items that was passed early this session was the 10% increase in the gas tax. I know that you were one that voted against this bill, and can you tell me kind of where you were coming from when?
I did, and it actually wasn't a 10% increase. It was a 10 cent per gallon increase,
10 cent.
which
Yes,
actually ended up nearly a 50% increase in state taxes. You know, what I told my colleagues on both sides of the aisle at the beginning of session is that if we were going to move in the direction of increasing fuel tax, that we needed to do it in a thoughtful way and look at number one, how the funding model worked. We needed to look at the formula. We needed to look at how we could most effectively get that money to the infrastructure that needed it most, which is roads and bridges is what we heard most of in rural communities. I voted against that bill because, first of all, I thought that significant an increase in taxes was not fair to Iowans. It was a substantial tax increase. And under the current funding model, my concern is that we weren't going to get the money where it was needed first. Most of the analysis that I've seen in the last couple of years in regards to the current formula, less than 10% of that 10 cent per gallon increase really will end up in rural infrastructure, rural roads and bridges, which was not the model that I was looking for. And that's why I voted against that bill. I thought we could do better, and I'm a little disappointed in the House, the Senate, and the governor's office for bringing the bill through on such short notice and not looking at the entire infrastructure.
Are there any possibilities of maybe because it is flawed in some areas to take and revisit it next session, or is this going to be kind of the law of the land from here on out?
You know, it's hard to say because every year at the legislature it has its own personality. So right. There will be some of us that think we've got it done, so we don't need to revisit it.
Right.
Although I think that what we're going to see in next year is we're going to see from our rural communities, especially from our county boards of supervisors, I suspect that they're going to be visiting the legislature this next year, and they're going to say, listen, we're not getting the money that we were promised just because of the way that the current funding model works. So I think if it's not next year, at least the year following, I think we're going to be forced to have to readdress the funding model so that we can get the money in infrastructure where it's needed the most and first.
Are there any mechanisms in place that that cities have to spend it based on infrastructure?
Well,
or can that go into their budget and they spend it any way they want?
Well, no. As you know, that there are certain limitations of what city government can do based upon the state code. I'm one that I believe in the best decisions are made at the local level and the ones closest to the people. So if anything, I look at those models and say, how can we get the money into the hands of our local officials who know best what to do with it?
And then next, Representative Taylor, because I know that you're a great soothsayer. You can look into the future.
Oh, sure.
When do you think this legislative session is going to wrap up? And if you win this one, you win the lottery. So.
Well, technically, it's supposed to wrap up May 1st, but you know, being the fact that we haven't even got our budget targets completely set yet, I doubt very much if we're going to be done in May. I look for us to probably work through at least part of June, most of June. I've been joking with my colleagues that if we're not done by the 4th of July, that I'd love to have all my colleagues come out and march in the Waukee 4th of July parade with us. And everyone laughs, and then they sit back and go,
uh-oh.
There might be something to that.
Exactly. Well, this is the first year of your second term.
It is.
Tell me what one thing you really like about the job and one thing you don't necessarily care for about the job.
You know what I really like the most about the job is helping people. I'm a people person, love to help people. It gives you, in this job, it gives you a unique perspective to how government can best work the best and how sometimes government fails. And my job is to come in and try and do my very best to help people with unique problems and issues, just like I do in my private sector job. What I'm most disappointed in, or what I was most surprised about, was how partisan things can get very quickly, and then we end up with deadlock. And I think we see that in our budget this year. And that's a little disappointing. I like the fact that in Iowa we can get things done and it's not Washington politics.
Absolutely.
And so I've been a little disappointed with that this year, but it's that time of the year.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised at that too, Rob, is because at least the session appeared to me that it was going to start off and you were going to get a lot of stuff done.
Yes.
Quickly.
Yes.
And then you're right, it kind of has taken a little bit of a detour. So,
it has. Yeah. But in the end, you know, there's only one thing that we're mandated by law to do as a legislator, and that's pass our budget. Everything else, all the other bills that we run through, that's part of our job, but we're mandated by law to pass our budget. So it has to get done, and if it's not, we're going to be in session until it's completed.
Right. I still stand by my thing that says the Iowa legislature, I think, is one of the great examples of what state government can do. I mean, you're head and shoulders above our federal government and the way that operates. I do think, even though it's a Democratic, Republican type of a form of government, you guys do a pretty good job, by and large, working together and getting things done.
To that point, my very first year that I served, that was the biggest surprise that I had. Is I would say roughly 90% of the time, we all get along up there in a very bipartisan way.
Right.
And it's that's 5 to 10% of the time where we have partisan issues that come up. And that's what the media picks up on and makes us look like we can never get along. We actually can, and I would say 90% of the time we get along in a bipartisan way.
And I think those are truly honest philosophical differences, and those are probably the hardest thing to bring together.
They are.
So 2016 is coming up fast, and if you live in Des Moines, you know that it's going to be a presidential year because we're ramping up there. What's your thoughts on potential presidential candidates?
Well, you know that we've got a lot of good ones. Of course, you know, I'm a Republican, so the guy that I'm looking at the most right now is Dr. Ben Carson. Mm-hmm. He's a phenomenal man. He's outside of the realm of politics for the most part. Never served in the public eye before as a politician, and I think that's one of the things that people are looking for as far as leadership today. They want people that can lead, that are proven leaders and aren't necessarily politicians. The thing I like about Dr. Carson is he can say things and do things sometimes that other people can't, and not having to worry necessarily about being in politics or what the ramifications of that are. It's admirable to watch somebody like that interact with the public. And just like anyone else, he's going to have his moments of faux pas. I think he's already had a few.
Sure.
But you know, we have Scott Walker, we've got Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, and then on the Democratic side we've got Hillary Clinton, and you know, she's got a substantial machine that has been built before, and it's going to be an interesting presidential cycle this time around.
Absolutely. Well, Representative Taylor, we're out of time. Appreciate your coming on today, and I thought you were very insightful on things that are going on in the State House. So,
thank you for having me, Bill.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on another segment of Capitol Preview, and Representative Taylor for coming here and asking the questions that Iowans have on their mind. Our next guest will be former State Senator Jeff Angelo, and Jeff's going to talk to us about what happens after the legislative end date is done. Thank you, and see you next segment.